Renaissance are an English progressive rock band, best known for their 1978 UK Top 10 hit Northern Lights, and progressive rock classics like Carpet of the Sun, Mother Russia, and Ashes Are Burning. They developed a unique sound, combining a female-led vocal with a fusion of classical, folk, rock, and jazz influences. Characteristic elements of the Renaissance sound are Annie Haslam's five-octave voice, prominent piano accompaniment, orchestral arrangements, vocal harmonies, acoustic guitar, bass guitar, synthesizer, and versatile drum work. The band created a significant following in the Northeast United States in the 70s, and that region remains their strongest fan base. The nucleus of the first lineup was composed of former members of the Yardbirds, Keith Relf and Jim McCarty, who intended to put something together with more of a classical influence. Renaissance was born, and the band released a studio album in 1969, and another in 1971. Subsequently, there was a period of high turnover of musicians until the classic lineup of Haslam, Jon Tout, Michael Dunford, Jon Camp, and Terry Sullivan was established, although none of them were in the original band. They were assisted with lyrics on many songs from Cornish poet Betty Thatcher-Newsinger. From 1972 to 1979, Renaissance released 7 successful studio albums, toured extensively, and sold out 3 nights in a row at Carnegie Hall with Tony Cox conducting the New York Philharmonic. The 80s were a lean time for them, with personnel changes, and 2 relatively unsuccessful studio albums, leading to disbandment in 1987. 2 different offshoots of Renaissance existed at the same time at one stage in the mid-90s. The band reformed in 1998 to record Tuscany, which was eventually released in 2001. However, they disbanded again the next year. 2009 heralded a new lineup for Renaissance, led by Haslam and Dunford, and since then the band has continued to record and tour. They were shocked and saddened by the sudden death of Dunford in November 2012. Later, Haslam stated that the band would continue touring. The current lineup is not as English as the band's early period, with 5 US-born members, and 1 English-born member who lives in the US. In April 2014, Renaissance released the studio album Symphony of Light. Original Incarnation, as the Yardbirds were transforming into the new Yardbirds, and then Led Zeppelin in 1968. Departing members Keith Relf and Jim McCarty formed an acoustic duo called Together. They released Henry's Coming Home BW Love Mum and Dad as a single on Columbia Records in November, without chart success. In January 1969, Relf and McCarty organized a new group devoted to experimentation between rock, folk, and classical forms. In his book Mountains Come Out of the Sky, An Illustrated History of Prog Rock, Will Romano quoted McCarty as saying, "Toward the end of the Yardbirds we wanted to do something a bit more poetic, if you like, not so heavy. A bit more folky. We had had enough of heavy rock." This quintet Relf on guitar and vocals, McCarty on drums, plus bassist Louis Sonamo, pianist John Hawken, and Relf's sister Jane as an additional vocalist released a pair of albums on Elektra and Island, the first one, titled simply Renaissance, being produced by fellow ex-Yardbird Paul Samuel Smith. The band had begun performing in May 1969, before recording had begun for the debut LP, mostly in the UK, but with occasional forays abroad, including festivals in Belgium and France. In February 1970 they embarked on a North American tour, but that month-long trek proved only marginally successful. Because of their Yardbirds credentials, they found themselves paired with brands such as the Kinks, and their new classically oriented direction did not always go down well with audiences. Beginning in the late spring of 1970, as touring began to grind on them, the original band gradually dissolved. Relf and McCarty decided to quit performing, and Sonamo joined Colosseum. Hawken organized a new lineup to fulfill contractual obligations and complete the band's second album, Illusion, which was left unfinished. Transition. Apart from Jane Relf, the new band consisted mostly of former members of Hawken's previous band, the Nashville Teens, guitarist Michael Dunford, bassist Neil Corner and singer Terry Crow, plus drummer Terry Slade. This lineup recorded 1 track, Mr. Pine, a Dunford composition, and played a few gigs during the summer of 1970. Meanwhile, a final recording session brought together the original lineup minus Hawken, with Don Shin sitting in on keyboards, and produced the album's closing track Past Orbits of Dust. The now completed Illusion was released in Germany in 1971, although it was not released in the UK until 1976. The album marked the beginning of Renaissance's long-standing collaboration with poet Betty Thatcher-Newsinger as lyricist when she co-wrote 2 songs with Relf and McCarty. The 2 remaining original members left in late 1970. Jane Relf was replaced by American folk singer Anne-Marie Binky Cullum, then John Hawken left to join Spooky Tooth and pianist Jon Tout replaced him. There is an extant video of that lineup performing 5 songs on a German TV program. The plan at the time was that Relf and McCarty would remain involved as non-performing members, Relf as a producer and McCarty as a songwriter. Both were present when singer Annie Haslam successfully auditioned in January 1971 to replace the departing Cullum. While McCarty would go on to write songs for the new band, Relf's involvement would be short-lived. Dunford soon emerged as a prolific composer, and continued the writing partnership with Thatcher, who would go on to write most of the lyrics for the band's 1970s albums. Second Incarnation, sometime in 1971, new manager Miles Copeland III decided to reorganize the band, focusing on what he felt were Renaissance's strong points: Haslam's voice and Tout's piano. Will Romano and Mountains Come Out of the Sky explained that unlike many of the artists to which they were compared, Renaissance allowed the piano and female voice to come to the forefront. Until then, Haslam had shared vocals with Terry Crow, who was in effect the band's chief vocalist. Crow and Corner went, the former unreplaced, the latter replaced by a succession of bass players, including John Wetton, Frank Farrell and Danny McCulloch, until the position settled with the inclusion of Jon Camp. It was also decided that Dunford would now concentrate on composing, and a new guitar player, Mick Parsons, was brought in for live work. In 1972, shortly before recording sessions for the new band's debut LP, drummer Terry Sullivan joined after Slade's initial replacement, Ginger Dixon, was deemed unsuitable following a European tour. Parsons died in a car accident and was replaced at short notice by Rob Hendry. The resulting lineup entered the studio having played only a dozen gigs together. Prologue was released later in 1972 on EMI Sovereign Records in the UK and on Capitol Sovereign in North America. Prologue's music was, except for 2 songs by McCarty, composed by Dunford, with all lyrics by Thatcher-Newsinger. Rock radio stations gave the song Spare Some Love significant airplay for a few months after the album's release, and fans of Yes and Emerson, Lake and Palmer in particular, took notice of the band. Francis Monkman, of the group Curved Air, was a guest on VCS3 synthesizer on the final track Raja Khan. Hendry was replaced for the Prologue tour by Peter Finberg, who in turn left the group shortly before the sessions for the next album. Michael Dunford then returned as guitarist, completing what most fans regard as the classic 5-piece lineup, which would remain together through 6 studio albums. Ashes Are Burning was released in 1973. Andy Powell, of the group Wishbone Ash, was brought in for a blistering electric guitar solo on the final track Ashes Are Burning, which became the band's anthem piece, extended to almost 20 minutes with a long bass solo and other instrumental workouts. The album became the band's first to chart in the US, where it reached number 171 on the Billboard 200. The band played their first US concerts during that period, enjoying success on the East Coast in particular, which soon resulted in a special orchestral concert at New York's Academy of Music in May 1974. Soon Renaissance would choose to concentrate on the US market, as the UK press virtually ignored them. Joining bottom label the band left Sovereign Records and joined Miles Copeland's new prog rock staple and label BTM. The label's first release was Turn of the Cards in 1974. With a larger budget, the album went from folk flavor to a more dark, lush, orchestral rock sound. One of the album's songs, Things I Don't Understand, which clocked in at 9:30, was Jim McCarty's last co-writing credit with the group. A lengthy tribute to Alex Ansol's Henson, called Mother Russia, closed out the album, with lyrics inspired by his autobiographical novel, One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. Turn of the Cards was first issued in the United States on Sire Records in August 1974, where it reached number 94, some months before an official UK release. It remained in the Billboard 200 for 21 weeks. Although Renaissance's fan base was relatively small, its following was heavily concentrated in the large cities of the northeast US. The album was eventually released in the UK in March 1975. It was soon followed by Scheherazade and Other Stories, released on both sides of the Atlantic in September 1975. The album, whose second side was taken up with the epic tone poem Song of Scheherazade based on stories from 1001 Nights, peaked at number 48 in the United States. There is no musical connection to the well-known classical work Scheherazade by Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. A double live album, Live at Carnegie Hall, followed in 1976. Despite criticisms that much of the album was little more than a note-for-note reproduction of highlights from their previous 4 studio albums, the album reached number 55 in the US. Renaissance were the first British band to sell out 3 consecutive nights at Carnegie Hall. They were joined on stage by the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. While introducing the song Ashes Are Burning, Haslam refers to it as the title track from the group's second album, rather than their fourth, suggesting that the Haslam-led lineup by this point considered themselves a distinct band from Keith Relf's incarnation of the group. Live at Carnegie Hall's follow-up, Novella, saw more chart success in the US, peaking at number 46 in 1977, although its UK release was delayed by yet another label change. Will Romano and Mountains Come Out of the Sky describes the band's situation with Renaissance was at an all-time popularity high, finding themselves playing to sold-out audiences. In the US, particularly in the northeastern part of the country, in Pennsylvania and New York. UK hit single although commercial success was limited during this period, Renaissance scored a hit single in Britain with Northern Lights, which reached number 10 during the summer of 1978. The single was taken from the album A Song for All Seasons, and received significant airplay in the US on both AOR and on radio stations adapting to a new format known as soft rock, now known as adult contemporary. The band performed on a modestly successful tour of the US east of the Mississippi and drew significant crowds in State College, Pennsylvania and Cleveland in May and June 1979, promoting both A Song for All Seasons and a mix of old and new tracks. Additionally, the band was able to get additional exposure via US television, being guests on the May 4, 1978 edition of The Mike Douglas Show, where they played Northern Lights. Renaissance floundered following 1979's Azure Dog, as many fans could not relate to a largely synthesizer-oriented sound. As a result, the band's fan base began to lose interest and the album only reached number 125. Dunford and Camp assumed most of the band's songwriting. In the 1970s, Renaissance defined their work with folk rock and classical fusions. Their songs include quotations from and allusions to such composers as Alain, Bach, Chopin, Debussy, Giotto, Maurice Jarre, Rachmaninoff, Rimsky-Korsakov, Prokofiev and Shostakovich. Renaissance records, especially Ashes Are Burning, were frequently played on American progressive rock radio stations such as WNEW-FM, WHFS-FM, WMMR-FM, KSHE 95 and WVBR. Critical reception to the classic lineup. Reviewers were deeply divided in their reactions to the classic period of Renaissance, and their style of music. Some critics saw little value in their music, like Wayne King's entry in the new Rolling Stone Record Guide describing the period 1974 to 1983. Their inability to compose songs that would allow for any fluidity or improvisation meant that Renaissance's appeal, non-existent in their native England and cultish at best in America, declined. And the remainder of the Sire material matches this commercial decline with an artistic one. The comeback attempt on IRS was a ludicrous failure. Progressive rock reviewers were much more supportive, such as Charles Snyder in the Strawberry Bricks Guide to Progressive Rock evaluating the album Scheherazade and Other Stories, who describes Annie Haslam's crystal-clear five-octave voice high in the mix, supported by the virtuoso talents of pianist Jon Tout and Jon Camp's distinctive Rickenbacker bass, and orchestral arrangements by Tony Cox. 1980 98, after the Azure Tour, Tout left the group for personal reasons, quickly followed by Sullivan. Subsequent albums Camera Camera and Timeline brought Renaissance more into the contemporary synthpop and new wave genre, but neither garnered enough commercial interest to make a viable future for the band. Camera Camera was the band's final album to chart in the US, where it reached number 196 in late 1981. In 1985 Camp left, and Haslam and Dunford led an acoustic version of the band and performed occasional shows. In 1988, Sire issued a two-part compilation, Tales of 1001 Nights, focusing on the band's 1972–79 period. In the 1990s most of their catalogue appeared on CD from reissue record labels such as Repertoire Records. In 2006 Repertoire issued remastered versions of Ashes Are Burning, Turn of the Cards and Scheherazade and Other Stories. In the mid-1990s both Haslam and Dunford formed their own bands using the name Renaissance and released albums with different lineups. Third Incarnation, Renaissance partially reformed in 1998 around a nucleus of Haslam, Dunford and Sullivan, plus Tout and several new musicians, most notably Roy Wood and Mickey Simmons, to records for CD Tuscany. In 1999, Haslam, Dunford and Simmons played a one-off trio concert at London's Astoria supporting Caravan. In March 2001, following the delayed release of Tuscany, a full band tour was organised, with a lineup of Haslam, Dunford, Sullivan, Simmons, Rave Tessa and David J. Keyes, who played one London concert on March 9 and 3 dates in Japan, Osaka on the 13th, Nagoya on the 14th and Tokyo on the 16th. The Tokyo concert was recorded and released as In the Land of the Rising Sun, Live in Japan 2001. Haslam, who had become the band's spokesperson, said that several factors made further touring and recording impractical. The band's short third incarnation was soon over. Terry Sullivan recorded an album called South of Winter in 2004, with a studio group he named Renaissance. It is evocative of Renaissance's music, with lyrics by Thatcher-Newsinger and keyboard contributions by Jon Tout. On September 20, 2008, Jon Tout made his first public appearance in the U.S. in over 25 years, with Annie Haslam and the Jan Close Band, at the Sellersville Theatre 1894 in Sellersville, Pennsylvania. In 2009, Tout suffered a heart attack. In August 2009, Haslam announced that she and Dunford were commemorating the 40th anniversary of Renaissance with a reformed band, called Renaissance 2009, and a concert tour. A tour in Eastern North America and Japan was undertaken in 2010, together with a 3-song EP release and a new official website. Renaissance headlined the sold-out final edition of the Northeast Art Rock Festival, entitled Near-Fest Apocalypse, on June 23, 2012. Deaths of Michael Dunford, Jon Tout and Betty Thatcher. Betty Thatcher, the band's non-performing lyricist who wrote most of the lyrics for the band, died on August 15, 2011. On November 20, 2012, Michael Dunford died from a cerebral hemorrhage at his home in Surrey, England. A few weeks later, Haslam stated that the band would continue touring in the future, despite losing her guiding light. In February 2013, it was announced that Ray Clander would be the guitarist on their 2013 tour, and he has established a permanent role in the band, although not appearing on their 2015 UK and European dates. Jon Tout died of lung failure on May 1, 2015 at the Royal Free Hospital in Hampstead, London. According to ultimataclassicrock.com, the band paid tribute to their former keyboardist on their Facebook page, saying, he was an amazing musician, highly contributing to the unique sound of the band from 1970 to 1980. Symphony of Light. In April 2013 a new Renaissance album, Grandi Nel Vento, was released. It was dedicated on the inside sleeve to Dunford. This album was reissued as Symphony of Light in April 2014 with 3 bonus tracks. Symphony of Light follows a similar path to the band's early work with a combination of shorter songs, and longer, more progressive tracks such as the title track, and The Mystic and the Muse. The band were joined by well-known guest musicians Ian Anderson playing flute on Cry to the World, and John Wetton performing a duet with Haslam on Blood Silver Like Moonlight. All the music was written by Dunford, except Renaissance Man, which was written by Tessa. All the lyrics were written by Haslam, and the artwork featured a painting Symphony of Light also by Haslam. Ralph Greco, Jr. in VintageRock.com observed that Symphony of Light thrives on lush production, evocative lyrics, excellent playing and that superlative voice that could only belong to Annie Haslam. The current lineup is not as English as the band's early period with 5 US-born members, and 1 English-born member who lives in the US. Personnel Members Current members, Annie Haslam lead and backing vocals, percussion, David J. Keys bass, backing vocals, Rave Tessa keyboards, Frank Pagano drums, percussion, Jason Hart keyboards, Roy Clander guitars. Current touring musicians, Tom Brislin keyboards, Mark Lambert guitar, Leo Traversa bass. Former members. Lineups Timeline Discography Studio albums Live albums Other releases In the Beginning, 1978, Tales of 1001 Nights, 1990, Da Capo, 1995, Live at the Royal Albert Hall, King Biscuit Flower Hour, 1997, Songs from Renaissance Days, 1997, The BBC Sessions 1975 1978, 1999, 2 CDs, Day of the Dreamer, 2000, Unplugged Live at the Academy of Music, 2000, Live Plus Direct, 2002, Dreams and Omens, 2008, Live in Chicago, 2010, The Mystic and the Muse, 2010, Past Orbits of Dust, 2012, Delane Lee Studio, 2014, Academy of Music, 2015. Singles UK, Ireland BW The Sea, 1969, Back Home Once Again BW The Captive Heart, 1977, Northern Lights BW Opening Out, 1978 UK number 10, The Winter Tree BW Island of Avalon, 1979, Jekyll and Hyde BW Forever Changing, 1979, Fairies BW Remember, 1981, Bonjour Swan Song BW Ukraine Ways, 1981, Richard the Nine BW Flight, 1983. US, Prologue BW Spare Some Love, 1972, Carpet of the Sun BW Bound for Infinity, 1973, Mother Russia BW I Think of You, 1974, Carpet of the Sun BW Kiev, 1976, Midas Man BW The Captive Heart, 1977, Northern Lights BW Opening Out, 1978, Jekyll and Hyde BW Forever Changing, 1979, Bonjour Swan Song BW Remember, 1981. Japan Only, Spare Some Love BW Prologue, 1972, The Mystic and the Muse 3-song EP, 2010. West Germany Only, Fairies BW Bonjour Swan Song. Michael Dunford's Renaissance These albums were essentially collaborations between Dunford and singer Stephanie Adlington. The Other Woman, 1994, Ocean Gypsy, 1997, Trip to the Fair, 1998. Annie Haslam's Renaissance This album was essentially an Annie Haslam solo release. Blessing in Disguise, 1994. Renaissance This album was essentially a Terry Sullivan solo release, with lyrics by Betty Thatcher-Newsinger and keyboards by Jon Tout. Terry's wife Christine did most of the vocals, with Terry himself taking lead on 2 songs. South of Winter, 2005. Major television appearances Don Kirshner's rock concert, multi-artist television program with Renaissance performing Can You Understand, and Black Flame. Syndicated, 1974. 11 minutes, original running time unknown. The Midnight Special, multi-artist television program with Renaissance performing Carpet of the Sun, and Midas Man. NBC, 1976. 5 minutes, original running time unknown. Sight and Sound in Concert, first in a series of programs consisting of artists performing live, with the performance broadcast simultaneously on TV and FM radio, hosted by DJ Alan Black. Songs performed were, Carpet of the Sun, Mother Russia, Can You Hear Me, Ocean Gypsy, Running Hard, Touching Once, and Prologue. Originally broadcast on January 8, 1977. BBC, 1977. Approximately 55 minutes. The Mike Douglas Show, television talk show features Renaissance performing Northern Lights, and Day of the Dreamer on May 4, 1978. MTV interview by J.J. Jackson with Annie Haslam and Jon Camp. MTV, April 1983. 10 minutes. Illusion. Shortly prior to his death, Keith Relf wanted to try to reform the original Renaissance. Since the name Renaissance was now firmly in the hands of the Haslam lineup, he chose the tentative band name Now. Jim McCarty was not involved at this point. After Relf's death, all of the surviving four formed a new band and named it Illusion after Renaissance's second album. Illusion released 2 albums for Island Records before splitting, while a third made up of unreleased demos appeared years later. The original 4 reformed again for the production of Through the Fire, which was released under the band name of Renaissance Illusion. And the eponymous second album of their reunion band, Illusion. Out of the Mist, 1977, Illusion, 1978, Enchanted Caress, previously unreleased material, 1990, Illusion, The Island Years, 2003. Renaissance Illusion Through the Fire, 2001. Covers of Renaissance songs This list does not include Renaissance songs performed by individual former members of the band. Ashes Are Burning, on the Faith and Disease albums Fortune His Sleep 1995 and Live Songs, Third Body, 1996, Ocean Gypsy, on the Blackmore's Night album Shadow of the Moon, 1997. References. External links, official band website, Renaissance official Facebook page, Northern Lights, Renaissance Fanfare, Annie Haslam's official site.